May the words of my mouth and the meditation of my heart be acceptable in your sight, O Lord, my strength and my Redeemer. Someone recently brought up the microphone, brought up the prophet Ezekiel to me, and the passage is this: "As surely as I live, declares the sovereign Lord, I take no pleasure in the death of the wicked, but rather that they turn from their ways and live." This is from chapter 33, verse 11, the 26th book of the Old Testament, and it's where Tatsuya Shindo really began to take interest in the Bible. He's in his late 50s. He wears his hair in a ponytail and has really funky white wraparound reading glasses. He started reading the Bible at the beginning with Genesis and told me that he found it extremely boring and uninteresting up until he got to Ezekiel. And suddenly, there's a scene there that he thought was pretty hilarious, where Ezekiel gets a message from God who says, you need to make bread over a fire with human dung. And they get into this back and forth. I forget where they land. But Shindo tells me, of course, there's deeper meaning in this, but at the time, I thought it was really funny. So I kept reading. And then he got to that passage, which turned out to mean quite a lot for him. He had a lot of time on his hands because Shindo was in prison. This was his third stint behind bars. I think he was charged this time with possession of methamphetamines, but he was up to all kinds of bad stuff at the time. Tatsuya Shindo joined the Yakuza, a Japanese organized crime gang, as a teenager. He rose through the ranks. He became, I think they called it a deputy lieutenant. When I asked him why he joined, he said, I was looking for a family. And the life with the Yakuza, he said, was a little bit like a family. There was a leader, he had responsibility, he had a role, he had brothers, even some sisters who were involved. But when I asked him what he did with the Yakuza, he did not speak about this with any nostalgia or romance whatsoever. He said he was involved in credit card scams, drug dealing, debt collection, which sounds like violence. The worst part of his job, he said to me, was managing women who were being trafficked by the gang. By the time he gets locked up for the third time, though, he's been kicked out of the Yakuza. He's basically got nothing. He's addicted to meth. To say he has not a bright future would be an understatement. And that's when he comes across this passage. I take no pleasure in the death of the wicked, but rather that they turn their ways and live. So he keeps reading, and he develops an interest in this very foreign faith of Christianity that emphasizes forgiveness and redemption. Only about 1% of Japan is Christian. He laughed when I asked him, what was your background with Christianity? What was your understanding? He's like, none, zero. So he kept studying scripture. He ended up going to seminary and became a pastor. And he now preaches at a church outside of Tokyo called Friend of Sinners, Lord Jesus Christ Church. He is, as part of his ministry, he visits people in prison. Some of the members of his congregation, like him, are former Yakuza members and former inmates. Shindo has tattoos running down his arms, and he's missing part of his left pinky, which in Japan are giveaways. If you see this, you know this is someone who is either with the Yakuza, with organized crime, or they were previously. And Shindo explained to me that in Japan, people are quite stingy about giving a second chance. He described it as a very narrow-minded society. Ex-inmates, whether you're with the Yakuza or not, have a really tough time getting back on their feet. And he explained some of this to me. Especially if you're sort of marked as a former Yakuza member, you can have a hard time like opening a bank account, getting a loan, getting a job. All these things, just all these roadblocks in your way. And so this is what he's focused on. And he explained to me that he still preaches about forgiveness. It's his favorite subject. He says, once you realize there's a God and that there is forgiveness, you have no choice but to change. And he readily admitted that he does not have a perfect track record. He has members of his congregation that have stolen from him and left and gone back to prison. He said that the recidivism rate in Japan, people who reoffend and go back to prison, is about 50%. But he said, you know, if I can reduce that rate a little bit and keep some people from going back, then I'm doing the right thing. And that's how he explained his ministry. Another person I was lucky enough to meet and interview in Japan when I was there recently is 78-year-old Shitsue Takahashi. She describes herself as not really religious at all. When I asked her about, you know, what role religion plays in your life, she says, well, I guess I'm a Buddhist. But she definitely has conviction. She stands probably just over 4 feet tall. When we met, she was wearing this blazingly red overcoat. The first thing she did when we sat down to do this interview was take out a tape recorder, put it on the table, and hit record. She said, so I can have my own recording. I thought, that's smart, talking to a journalist. I was there to ask Takahashi about her husband and about her life as well, but she described her husband, Kazumasa, as a gentle person, a good father, and a leader at work. Kazumasa Takahashi was an assistant station master for the Tokyo Subway Authority. On March 20th, 1995, Shitsue called him up at work to remind him that their 25th anniversary was coming up. And that was the last time they spoke. Sorry. He was killed that morning. A doomsday cult called Om Shinrikyo put sarin gas packages on the subway, packed trains in the middle of morning rush hour. Somehow, miraculously, only 12 people were killed, but 6,000 people were injured, some of them seriously. This was the worst domestic terrorist attack in Japan's modern history. Kazumasa Takahashi and his colleagues were some of the first to respond. They ran downstairs without hesitation, started to mop up whatever it was that was in the subway. They wanted to get people back on the train so they could go to work, get there on time. They didn't know what they were dealing with. He collapsed. He died probably an hour or two later. By the time Shitsue arrived at the hospital a few hours later, she said his body was cold. I asked her, had you ever heard of this group, Om Shinrikyo? And she said, no, I'd never heard of him before that day. And she said, who would have thought that a religious group would do this, would commit such an act? But these were the people that took my husband away, she said. And she became determined to learn, who are they? What are they about? What happened? What was this about? She started following the authorities as the justice system kicked in. People were arrested, there were trials. In Japan, the courts are closed in many ways, unlike in the US, where the public, even victims' families, are not allowed to go attend certain trials or see testimony or documents from the legal system. She pushed this issue relentlessly and got the laws changed so people like her could go to court, could sit in these trials and hear and learn what was happening. She connected with the relatives of people who were killed and injured in the sarin gas attack. They created a victims association to advocate for themselves, to demand transparency from the government, and to seek compensation. Over the years, Shitsue Takahashi has become one of the most recognizable advocates in Japan for the victims of that attack. She has attended memorial services, gone to ceremonies. She's talked with journalists like me, academics, met with foreign diplomats. After 9/11, she flew to the US, met with victims' families here. A lot of people in Japan want to instinctively forget about what happened 30 years ago. At the very least, they don't want to talk about it. This is according to a book written by Haruki Murakami. It's an excellent book. I highly recommend it. It's in English. You can find it. It's called Underground, about the sarin gas attack. In 2018, Japan executed the founder of Aum Shinrikyo, Shoko Asahara was his name, along with 12 other senior leaders. Some of the people that Murakami spoke with in his book were adamant that this was justice. This needed to be done. Those people deserved the death penalty. When I asked Shitsue Takahashi for her views on this, she said, "I've thought about this a lot." But she sort of dodged the question. She wouldn't say one way or the other whether she thought these people deserved the death penalty, but she was very clear on one thing. She said, the justice system in Japan needs to be more transparent. People need to know what happened. She submitted a request for information about the capital punishment, about the executions and the trials, capital trials. And they sent her like several hundred pages of documents. And when she opened them, they were all blacked out. So she goes every year to the Justice Ministry and delivers to the minister the same message once a year to say, this system needs to be transparent. People need to know what's happening, what justice, how this justice system works. She said people need to know if there's a religious group that's a danger to society, that there's some security threat like this. People need to know about it. In the first few years after the sarin gas attack, Takahashi told me she hardly slept. She slept like 2 or 3 hours a night. People from the media were calling all the time. She had places to be, things to read, people to meet. But over time, she realized that she needed to take time for herself to grieve for her husband, which she did not do for several years. She said being committed to the Victims Association also took a toll on her family. She had 3 kids, has 3 kids. And she had sort of admitted that this was impossible to be a good mother at the time. I was absent. And it took me a while to realize that the kids needed time to grieve and I needed to be there with them. So over time, that got better. And she says, now, she does have a sense of contentment, like she's accomplished something and she can give herself some credit, and her kids see that in her, and they've all agreed to go out for cake more often, and tea, and go on trips and spend time together. And she says that we are a family